trying to make sure they're heard. Did you hear the boat? Oop, I almost had an ending. I almost had all my data gone. Whoop. Not, not data gone. No, but I will say that I cannot access some of my data. I did actually bring that out. Take a picture of that. Because there's data. So I have said before that on my that my hard drives were stolen. And this is the last thing. I just took a picture of this. That it shows that I can't access these files, and there should be no reason since I backed them up. Some of the files there are available and can access them, and some of them I can't access. And it would stand to reason that the ones that I likely can't access are the ones that have been compromised by Oakland University. But that is more for the philosophical classroom and for other classrooms. I have eliminated philosophical today. This is the 4th of July. It's the 4th of July. So I'm going to do philosophical tomorrow. Usually I don't do it on Wednesday. And what we're going to do now is we're going to read the next 2 chapters from our book, The Mostly True Adventures of Homer P. Figg, which is just a great story, right? Oh, I didn't bring my flowers in from outside. It's warm out here in Michigan. How about that for a title, right? For today. When the screaming comes inside. As we drop closer to the ground, everything speeds up. It's like the earth is turning faster, whipping great trees at the basket and barely missing. Then we're flying over rocky fields, Tilda and me, fields where men on horseback chase one another, firing guns and waving swords. Suddenly, the ground explodes under the horses, and man and beast vanish in a flash of blood-staining lightning. We're being swept over a battlefield, and what I thought was thunder and lightning is artillery shells blowing the world to pieces. Right about then, the rip in the silk catches fire, and the fabric starts to melt. I scramble over to the side of the basket, clinging with my fingers, deciding when to jump. All I catch is a glimpse of green water, but with the balloon dissolving into red-hot flames, making up my mind is no longer an option. I must let go and take my chances. I drop through the air like a screaming stone, plunging feet first into a scummy green frog pond. When you're falling from 100 feet or more and the sky is on fire, even scummy water is better than solid ground. At least the fall don't kill me. Trouble is, I can't find the surface. Can't tell which way is up because my fists are full of mud. Like I've been clawing at the bottom of my legs, and my legs are caught in a tangle of lily pad roots that want to tug me down. I'm trying to breathe the warm, slimy water. If frogs can do it, why not me? When something grabs hold of my hair and yanks me up into the sunlight. Woo! Can't see right off because I'm coughing so hard, but after a few minutes of having the water shook out of me, I realize I've been saved by a scrawny little man in a gray uniform. He's missing his front teeth and his tongue keeps sliding over the gap as he shakes me. Then he hands me over to a bunch of men in gray uniforms that have been refreshing their horses at the edge of the pond. Cavalry from the look. They talk funny, kind of slow and lilting, but I can understand them well enough. Little critter fell out of the sky, did he? Yes, sir. Like he'd been shot from a cannon. Weren't no cannon, sir. He come from a way of surveillance balloon. That's what's left of it, burning in those trees over yonder. Is that a fact? Yes, sir. Must be a Yankee spy, getting a fix on our position. Sir, he ain't but a boy. Another more powerful voice cuts through the argument. What have we here? Report. Rough hands pass me along to where a beautiful uniformed man sits on horseback, hands folded over his pommel. Looks like he lives in the saddle and likes it there. He wears an elegant cape and a rakish hat decorated with a long plumed feather. A fancy sword hangs from his waist. Yankee boy fell out of a balloon, General Jeb saw. The dashing young general leans down from the saddle to study me, makes a show of tugging at his thick, full beard. Might be a boy, he drawls, a twinkle in his eyes. And might be he's a midget spy dressed to look like a boy. I wouldn't put it past them clever Yankees to fool us like with midgets and whatnot. Yes, sir. The men are grinning as if they know their general likes to make jokes. What's your name, midget man? The general demands. I've miles to ride and haven't the time or stomach for any more tomfoolery. Tell me your name. Homer Figg. And I ain't no midget. Yankee for sure. Take him to the bullpit. Turns out a bullpit is where prisoners get confined, and in this case, the pit is a stall in a barn that's been temporarily requisitioned by the Confederate forces who stand guard outside. Requisition being another word for stole, which is armies do what they need. Which is what armies do when they need things. They steal them. Bookless classroom. I didn't talk so much about that. Some of the constitutional violations that were going on during war. We'll probably mention that tomorrow. I'll probably mention that tomorrow in the Bookless classroom. I'll try and remember. All of which is explained to me by a bright yellow fellow named Jonathan Griswold, who says he is correspondent for the Valley Spirit, a newspaper in Chambersburg. I should be in the office setting type, he explains, but our fine little city has lately been overrun by invading rebels. They requisitioned all of the bread and grain and every spare saddle and all the horseshoes and nails for the horseshoes and looked about ready to requisition the printing press and me. Seemed a good opportunity to venture out and see the war. That's what I think is happening right here. So people who think that they are, DJT soldiers have now been overrun by DJT's soldiers. Today, who would have thought? Mr. Jonathan Griswold has a mousy brown mustache, a pair of reading spectacles hanging from a ribbon around his skinny neck, and a whole cavalry of ideas and opinions at his command. He says I rode out from the little town called Gettysburg, expecting to find the Union Army, and was intercepted by Stuart's raiders, who have no particular affection for Yankee newspaper men. I take it you were seized by the same fellows? The man had a feather in his hat. Jeb Stuart himself, the newspaper man says, sounding impressed. They say he can ride circles around the Union Army and will report back to Robert E. Lee before the main battle starts. He called me a midget. I complained still incensed. A midget and a spy. The newspaper man chuckles. Did he now? They've taken away my notebook, but I must remember that. A midget and a spy. That's an improvement on tales about girls who disguise themselves as soldiers and dogs who save their masters. I can see you are no midget, sir, but if, as they tell me, you arrived by surveillance balloon, then surely you really are a spy of sorts, and too young for hanging, lucky for you. Outside the stall, the Confederate guards are acting ever so casual, smoking their pipes and complaining about the rations, but I can tell they're keeping keen ears for our conversation. So I decided to tell the newspaper man all about traveling with Professor Fleabottom and that he's really a rebel patriot arrested by the Union Army, and how I escaped in a stolen balloon. Said his true name is Crockett, Reginald Robert Crockett. I say as my tale concludes. He's got a brother, Levi. They beat up something awful. Crockett, you say, the newspaper man exclaims. That's a famous name in the South. Was your medicine show man related to Davy Crockett that died at the Alamo? Must have been, I say, working up some enthusiasm for the idea. In fact, I'm sure he is. I once saw him kill a mountain lion with his bare hands. Must be the Crockett blood. A mountain lion, extraordinary. Bare hands, you say. Of course, it was an old lion, missing most of its teeth, escaped from a circus. And you were employed by Mr. Crockett, also known as Professor Fleabottom? You might say so, I said grandly. I was the star of the show. Star of the show? In what capacity? I played the amazing Wolf Boy, raised by wolves, and so on. The newspaper man is nodding feverishly as if anxious to write it down, if only he had pen and paper. The Confederate guards lean closer, hanging on my every word, just as I planned. Of course, I was really raised by wolves, I confide. I'm a Figg. You probably heard of the Figgs. We're the richest family north of Boston. Figgs own most of the timber or railroad, a good portion of the mines, and a fleet of schooners. Plus too many farms and factories to bother mentioning. Why, we even own slaves. I add, eyeing the guards. Dozens of them. Dozens of them. Hundreds probably, if you took the trouble to count. We Figgs favor slavery. My father, when he was governor, he wrote a law saying every man must own a slave. Owning slaves is what makes America great. Everybody knows that. Everybody but that fool Lincoln. My father says if Lincoln was to take away our slaves, he'd chop old Abe down like Washington chopped down the cherry tree. Would he really? Adds a newspaper man looking aghast. Course he would. Give up our slaves? Never. It's slaves that make us rich. Slaves that make us happy. Slaves that make the pancakes and churn the butter and boil the syrup. My father once gave me a slave whose job it was to follow me around and sweep away my footprints so I could pretend to be invisible. That's how many slaves we own, that he could spare one for erasing footprints. I see, says the newspaper man doubtfully. Point is, we Figgs may be from Maine, but our hearts lie with the Southern rebels. Yes, sir, never met a slave I didn't want to own. Fact is, most every slave I ever saw, we did own. Hundreds of them, you say. Hundreds of them, you say, in Maine, with your wealthy family? Not wealthy, rich. Rich is better. More slaves if you're rich. The Confederate guards are nodding at one another, and one of them turns to leave. I figure he's off to tell his boss they have put a true friend of the South in jail by mistake. That's when the screaming starts and ruins my plan. A terrible screaming that puts a chill down my spine and makes my knees shiver. A screaming that makes the guards forget the amazing story of the boy in the balloon. What's that? I asked the newspaper man, whose face has gone gray. I think I know, he says. He pulls himself up to the barred window in one corner of the stall and has a look. He drops back and wipes his sweaty hands on his trouser legs. The wounded, he explains. The battle must have begun. They're bringing wounded to the barn. And then the doors burst open and the screaming comes inside. On the terrible first day of July. They come by the cartload, moaning soldiers stacked in flatbed wagons or carts drawn by horse or by hand. Mostly the wounded scream only when the cart hits a bump. Some have already stopped screaming and are put aside as the carts are unloaded, their faces covered with a scrap of cloth. The rest are carried into the barn on litters, awaiting treatment. Dozens and dozens of men, some of them crying out for their mothers, wives, or their sweethearts. The dozens soon become 100, stacked inside the barn and out, under the shade of the eaves. The Battle of Gettysburg has begun, the newspaper man confides. They say that for part of the day the Union cavalry held its own, but are now being driven back through the town. According to our guard, thousands of Union troops have surrendered or been taken prisoner. The rebels expect that Lincoln's army will be defeated in a day or two, just as they were in Chancellorsville, and then General Robert E. Lee and his troops will invade Washington from the north, and declare victory. Is it true, I want to know, the North is it true, I want to know, the North has lost? Truth? The newspaper man says, shaking his head. The truth is hard to come by when bullets are flying. The battle won't be truly won or lost until the dead are counted. The rebels may be whining at Gettysburg, but their triumph is not without cost. Most of the wounded have been gravely injured, and the rebel surgeons are as busy as carpenters prying their bullets and sawing off limbs. The only thing worse than a man screaming in pain is the sound of the saws cutting through bone. A good surgeon is like a good butcher. He knows his cut of meat. He will roll up his sleeves, administer a little ether if he's got it, and have a leg cut off and the stump cauterized in a few minutes. The newspaper man explains. Longer than that, and the man will die of pain or loss of blood or both. And it is less than half of these men will survive. As it is, less than half of these men will survive the day. Of those that do, another half will die of infection. Then I don't hear no more of what he's got to say because I'm covering my ears to muffle the screaming and the terrible wet noise of the saw. I curl up facing the wall so not to watch the horrible business of tending to the wounded. Inside my head, I'm praying Harold has not seen the elephant or been injured or worse. Best things might be if he surrendered or was taken prisoner, but that's foolishness. A boy brave enough to stand up to Squintin Leach would never surrender to no rebel. Knowing Harold, he's probably been promoted on the battlefield. Heck, if I don't find him soon, he'll likely be the youngest general in history. That's what I cling to, the thought of Harold somehow surviving, a fevered dream of hope that I'll find him before he's killed and we'll escape back to Maine, and kindly Mr. Brewster will take us in and we'll live like proper people with beds to sleep in and 3 squares a day and milk and pie in the evenings. We'll sit by the fire jawing with Mr. Brewster and help the escaped slaves if they still need help, and make sure Bob, the horse, has plenty of hay and oats if he wants them. I'll go to school like our dear mother intended and learn everything there is to know about the world. I'll learn how to stop people from starving and put an end to wars and slavery and meanness and cruelty. And Harold will manage the tourmaline mines for Mr. Brewster. In my dream, Harold will be happy and strong and find a wife to darn his socks of an evening and give him children that are never hungry and never get beat or locked in the barn like animals and never have to run away to war to save their big brothers and see arms and legs being stacked like cordwood, or men dying of their wounds, or hear the keening of boys who miss their mothers and beg to see her in heaven. They say that even in the worst battles, some of the troops survive. Please, dear Lord, let that someone be my big brother. That's all I'm asking. Don't let him die in a pony cart jammed with the wounded, or tied to a plank while they saw his limb off one by one, or carried home in a casket wagon. Please, dear Lord, please let him be okay wherever he is, and tell him Homer is coming. Along about noon, something changes. The cartloads of wounded stop arriving, and the pitiful moaning slacks off, and the weary surgeons and their assistants wash the blood from their hands and have something to eat and drink. The horses and ponies that survived the battle are fed and watered too, and some of them are put into stalls next to me and Jonathan Griswold, the newspaper man, where they neigh and nicker and rub themselves nervously against the stalls as if trying to scratch away the fright of what they've been through. History is happening today, the newspaper man laments, fiddling with his spectacles, and I am stuck in a barn with the dumb animals blind as a bat. I'm not even pen and ink to mark down rumors of these great events. At least you have a hand to write with, even if you ain't got a pen, I remind him. True enough, he admits, I should count my blessings. There is a triumphant talk among the troops that the war has finally been won, that the Confederate troops will soon sweep away the last Union army and either kill them or take them prisoner. The newspaper man, keeping his voice low, confides that it may be just as they say, but that the rebels have been chasing victory for 2 years and have never quite gotten there. He says that while each man the South loses is gone forever, the more populous North has more men to lose. The more populous North has more men to lose, and many more that can be drafted to replace them. In the end, it is a game of numbers, not so much who has the will to win, but who has the most men and materials to sacrifice. The war is a meat grinder, as you have seen. Sometimes in the middle of the afternoon, maybe the reason why DJT keeps saying more and more kids, right? Sometimes in the middle of the afternoon, a messenger arrives shouting at the top of his lungs, "To the front! All men fit for fighting are commanded to the front. The Union Army flees and General Lee orders all fit men to the chase. Have 'em, boys. We got 'em on the run at last." The barn is suddenly alive with cries for victory. Even some of the most desperate wounded beg to be taken back into battle with rifles placed in their shivering hands. All men to the front! All men to the front! Long live the South! Long live Robert E. Lee! Well, he's calling wounded men. It can't be that the South are doing too well, right? Saying one thing, but another is the reality. The men guarding us have been affected by the excitement. They pick up their weapons and haversacks and race from the barn to join their comrades, leaving me and the newspaper man pretty much alone. Now is our chance, I whisper. I'll take the smallest horse. He firmly shakes his head. I dare not, he says, sounding regretful. They will shoot me for certain. Will they shoot a boy, I ask? He shrugs. Who can say what men will do when the heat of the battle is upon them? But these rebels are decent enough. They will be aiming for men in blue uniforms. He looks at me with great concern. But why flee? I thought you favored the South, that your family owned slaves by the dozen. By the hundreds, I tell him. All lies. The only side I favor is named Harold Figg, and I will find him or die trying. There is an excellent chance you will succeed in dying, he warns me. Best stay here and keep your head down. I made a promise, I explain. Remember my name in case I am forgot. Homer Figg of Pine Swamp, Maine. A moment later, I'm over the stall and leading a pony to daylight. Chapter 32 out of 36. We don't have a lot to go. And these chapters are short from here on out. So we might finish this. Maybe we'll extend it to Thursday, right? Since this is a celebration week for our Independence Day. So 32, things best forgot. This is Dr. Annette Feravich in a state that is trying to wipe out literature and what? And what are they doing? Are you seriously taking and cutting and splicing how well I read this book and trying to make a case for I'm not of this race? Seriously? Dr. Annette Feravich, I'm the teacher, and I hope you learned a lot. Thank you for all of those real patriots, not those fake patriots, not those who belong to Vanguard, not those who belong to State Street, not those who belong to BlackRock, but those who really are part of our executive branch, right? So saluting to all of those people who really did give their lives for our independence, for our democracy, whether it was a freedom of religion or whether it was a freedom of speech or whether it was a freedom of the press or whether it was a freedom to be able to reside where you wanted to in a free country, right? So keep our freedoms, because there are a lot of people and a lot of effort put to convince people that they have a certain way, and that certain way will be honored when when the shit hits the fan. And it simply won't be. It simply won't be. Anyone who destroys a democracy destroys it for everybody. Anyone who destroys a democracy destroys it for everybody. This is Dr. Annette Feravich. I'm the teacher. Happy 4th of July. Enjoy the sunshine here, at least in Michigan. This has been the classroom, and this has been the reading room. Thanks. I'll see you tomorrow.